The alien city was burning. Flames rose into the black night sky, turning smoke into a red cloud that covered the stars. Explosions echoed through the streets, mixed with the screams of the wounded. James, a human soldier far from his homeworld, ran through the narrow stone alleys with his rifle ready. His mission was simple: get out alive, but nothing in this war had ever gone as planned. He moved quickly, keeping his head low. The ground shook with each distant blast. The enemy forces were sweeping the city, hunting for survivors. James knew if they found him, it was over. But then he heard it, a sound different from the chaos around him. A voice, weak and desperate, calling out in the dark. He stopped and looked down a side street. In the shadows between the broken walls, he saw a small cage made of black metal. Inside was a young alien woman, her skin a pale silver blue that shimmered in the firelight. She clung to the bars, her wide golden eyes locking onto his. Her lips trembled, and she whispered in a language he didn't understand. But he didn't need a translator to know she was begging for help. James scanned the area. The street was empty, but he knew that could change in seconds. Every part of his training told him to keep moving, to focus on survival, but something in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't just fear, it was trust. She believed he would help her, even though they had never met. He approached the cage, his boots crunching on broken glass. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly. She tilted her head, trying to understand. Then she pressed her hands together and pushed them toward him through the bars. A universal plea. He saw bruises on her wrists, marks that looked like she had been dragged and beaten. James tried the cage door. Locked, he looked around and found a steel pipe among the rubble. With a quick strike, he smashed the lock. The door creaked open, and the girl stumbled out. Almost falling, he caught her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected. Her body trembling with exhaustion, she spoke again. This time, more urgently, her words were fast, filled with warning. He caught only one in the translator device: execution. His stomach tightened. Whoever had locked her up wasn't going to let her escape without a fight. A sudden noise made him turn. Voices enemy soldiers were getting closer. James lifted her into his arms, ignoring her startled gasp. "We're moving," he said firmly. Without waiting for a reply, he carried her down the alley. Taking sharp turns to avoid open streets, the girl clung to him, her golden eyes scanning the shadows as if she expected death to leap from them at any moment. The heat from the fires pressed against them, making the air heavy. Every corner they turned, James expected to see soldiers blocking the way. But luck or something else kept them ahead of the danger. They reached the outskirts of the city, where the stone streets turned into dusty paths. The sound of battle was still behind them, but here it was quieter. James finally set her down. Letting her lean against a crumbling wall, she caught her breath, then looked at him with an intensity that made him pause. Slowly, she placed her hand on his chest and spoke in her language again. The translator struggled, then delivered the words in a soft, mechanical voice. "You saved me." James nodded, brushing dust off his uniform. "Yeah, well, don't thank me yet," he said, scanning the dark horizon, but she wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her voice trembling, but firm. The translator clicked and spoke her next words. "Now, claim your right of first night." James froze. He wasn't sure if he heard correctly. The phrase meant nothing to him, but the way she said it. It was no casual request. Her eyes didn't waver, even as distant explosions lit up the sky behind her. Something about the way she stood, despite her injuries, told him this wasn't a matter of romance or choice. It was law. And in her world, law was life or death. Before he could respond, more shouts came from the city. Closer now, the girl grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the darkness of the hills. James didn't know where they were going. He didn't know why she had spoken those strange words. All he knew was that they were running into the unknown, and whatever was waiting there had already begun the moment he opened that cage. The hills were cold under the night sky. The smoke from the burning city drifting in the wind and mixing with the scent of scorched metal. James kept moving, his boots crunching over dry soil. The alien girl stayed close, sometimes stumbling, sometimes glancing back as if the shadows themselves were chasing her. They didn't speak for a long time, both listening for the sound of pursuit. The fire behind them glowed faintly now, a reminder of the chaos they had escaped. James slowed his pace only when the terrain became too rough to run. They stopped near the mouth of an old stone structure, half buried in the hillside. She looked at it, then at him, and pointed inside. Her voice was quiet, but certain. He followed her into the darkness. The walls inside were carved with strange shapes, worn down by centuries of wind and dust. She guided him to a corner where a faded blanket lay. Clearly, someone had hidden here before. James sat down, catching his breath. The girl lowered herself beside him, her golden eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. She spoke in her language, the translator's mechanical voice breaking the silence. "You have saved me. This cannot be undone, and you have the right of first night." He shook his head, still unsure. "Look, I don't even know what that means," he said, keeping his voice low. The translator clicked again after her reply. "It is our oldest law. It is not only a right, it is a bond that protects the woman. No one can take her, no one can harm her, without facing death." James leaned back against the wall, the words sinking in. "So, if I don't do this, what happens to you?" he asked. Her answer came quickly. "They will kill me for dishonoring you. Or sell me to a clan that will do worse." The wind outside howled through the cracks in the stones. He looked at her again. She wasn't speaking with fear now. She was speaking with certainty. This wasn't a request she was making out of emotion. It was survival. James felt a weight in his chest. He had pulled her from that cage, thinking only of the moment. But now he had stepped into something far larger than he understood. She touched the side of his arm gently. "You do not have to. Decide now, but the law watches and the law waits for no man." The translator's voice carried a strange gravity in its tone, as if even the machine understood. They shared a few mouthfuls of water from his canteen, then sat in silence. Now and then she would glance at the doorway, her fingers tracing the patterns on the wall. James noticed her hands never stopped moving, always searching, always aware. She was not just a helpless prisoner. She was someone who had learned to live under constant threat. Hours passed, and the night grew colder. James gave her his jacket. She hesitated, but then pulled it around herself. The human scent clinging to the fabric seemed to relax her. Her breathing slowed, but her eyes stayed open. When the first faint light of dawn touched the sky, movement stirred outside. James shifted. Into position, rifle ready. She grabbed his sleeve and whispered one word before the translator caught up: "Scouts." They pressed themselves against the wall. As shadows moved across the hillside, two alien soldiers passed by slowly. Scanning the ground, James kept still, the girl's hand gripping his arm tightly. The soldiers stopped near the entrance. One looked inside, his gaze sweeping over the darkness. James's finger tightened on the trigger. But then a sudden noise from down the hill distracted them. They turned and moved away. Disappearing over the ridge, when they were gone, James exhaled slowly. The girl looked at him with an expression he couldn't read, a mix of relief and something deeper. "You see," she said through the translator, "without you, I am prey. With you, I am untouchable. This is why the law exists." He didn't answer right away. His mind was already turning over possibilities. If the law really worked, the way she claimed, then agreeing, might be the only way to keep her safe. But he also knew that binding himself to an alien custom could pull him into a political storm he wasn't ready for. They left the shelter as the sun rose higher, the city. Smoke now just a dark smear on the horizon. The path ahead led into dry plains. The air felt heavy, as if the land itself knew danger was never far away. She walked beside him now instead of behind. Every so often, her eyes would flick toward him, watching for signs of his decision. James didn't speak of it again, but in his mind, the question was already there. Burning quietly, was he willing to accept her law and everything that came with it? Or would he risk letting her fall into the hands of those who had already tried to break her? The answer, he knew, would come sooner than he wanted, because in this war-torn world, choices never waited. They came for you, fast and without mercy, just like the night he found her.
The dry plains stretched endlessly ahead, the wind sweeping dust into the air. James walked with a steady pace, the alien girl matching his steps. Though her legs still showed the strain of the night before, her golden eyes scanned the horizon. Searching for movement, she seemed to know that danger did not sleep here. They moved without talking, the silence between them heavy but not hostile. It was the silence of two people who both understood that speaking too much could draw the wrong kind of attention. When the sun reached its peak, they stopped under the shadow of a broken stone pillar. The only piece left of what might have been an ancient gate. James passed her a ration bar. She took it carefully, studying the wrapping before opening it. Her movements were deliberate, precise, like someone who had learned to survive on little. She ate in small bites, watching him from time to time as if she was still trying to figure him out. After a while, she spoke, her voice quiet. The translator hummed before delivering the words. "You think the law is strange, but to me, it is life." James met her gaze. "I think I don't know enough to decide anything," he replied. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Then I will teach you, before it is too late." They continued walking until the land dipped into a narrow valley, jagged rocks on both sides creating a natural path. It felt safer here. But James knew such places could also be perfect for an ambush. His instincts were right, because moments later, a sound broke the quiet, the distinct click of a weapon being loaded. From behind the rocks, 3 alien figures stepped out, their armor dark and scratched, their weapons aimed at him. The leader, taller than the others, spoke in a sharp tone. The translator picked it up. "Leave the girl, human. She is not yours." James kept his rifle pointed down, but his muscles tense. Before he could answer, the girl stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding. "You cannot take me," the translator echoed. "He has the right of first night." The soldiers exchanged glances, their leader's expression twisting with disbelief. "A human? Impossible," he growled, but there was hesitation in his tone. James noticed it. The law she spoke of had weight here, enough to make even armed men second-guess themselves. Still, the leader stepped closer, testing James's reaction. James raised his weapon slowly, his voice low and firm. "She's under my protection." The soldiers froze for a heartbeat. Then one of them muttered something that made the leader stop his advance. With a glare, he motioned for his men to back off. As they retreated, the girl stood beside James, her chin lifted in quiet pride. "Do you see?" she asked softly once they were gone. "Even without the ceremony, they hesitate," James exhaled, lowering his weapon. "Yeah, I see," he said, though he wasn't sure if he liked the power that came with her claim. They kept moving, but the encounter had changed something between them. James now understood that her law wasn't just tradition. It was a shield, one that enemies feared to cross. But shields could also paint a target, and he knew word of this encounter would spread. By late afternoon, the valley opened into a dry riverbed, cracked earth stretching far into the distance. They followed it until they found a small pool of muddy water left from a recent rain. They drank cautiously, the girl kneeling beside him, their reflections distorted in the ripples. She glanced at him and said, "In my world, the first night is not about desire, it is about promise. Once given, it binds the man to protect the woman until death. It binds her to stand with him in every fight." Her eyes held his as the translator spoke, and James realized she was asking without asking. Night began to fall, painting the sky in deep shades of red and gold. They set up a small camp near the riverbed's edge. James built a low fire, keeping it hidden from view. The girl sat close to the flames, the heat casting a glow across her silver-blue skin. For the first time since they met, she seemed almost at ease, but then her expression shifted. She leaned toward him slightly, her voice dropping low. The translator's output was faint. "They will come for me again, and next time, they will not leave without blood." James looked into the fire, the weight of her words pressing against him. He didn't answer right away, but in his mind, the choice that had been haunting him was becoming less about culture and more about survival. Because if the law could keep her safe, and by extension, keep them both alive, then maybe it wasn't just her tradition anymore. Maybe it was the only way forward. Above them, the stars began to appear, cold and distant, but the world around them felt small, the danger close, the promise unspoken, and the path ahead uncertain. The morning came cold and quiet. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. James woke to find the alien girl already awake, standing at the edge of the dry riverbed, her eyes scanning the distance. She looked calm but alert, like someone who had lived too many days expecting danger. They moved on without wasting time. The sky was pale and the wind sharp, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke. James could tell it wasn't from the city they had left. This was fresher. Closer, the girl seemed to sense it too. Her steps quickened. By midday, they reached a cluster of old stone buildings, half buried in sand. The walls were cracked and leaning, but one structure still stood, a wide hall with faded banners hanging from its ceiling. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of dust and metal. As they entered, shadows moved at the far end of the hall. A group of rebels emerged, their weapons drawn but not aimed. Their leader, a woman with pale skin marked by deep scars, stepped forward, her gaze landing first on James, then on the girl. "You've brought trouble here," she said in the alien tongue, the translator echoing the sharpness of her tone. James stayed silent, watching as the girl stepped forward. "We seek shelter, and he is my protector under the law." The leader's eyes narrowed. "A human? That law was not meant for your kind." The room grew tense. The rebels shifted uneasily. James could feel the weight of every stare. The leader studied them both for a long moment before speaking again. "If you truly claim the right, you must prove it. Otherwise, she stays here under my control, and you leave." James didn't like the sound of that. The girl turned to him, her voice low but urgent. "If she takes me, you will not see me again. They will trade me for supplies, or worse." The air felt heavier now, the choice pressing in on him from all sides. The leader signaled to two rebels. They rolled out a large circular table made of black stone, carved with old symbols. "This is the proof," she said. "You stand together before the witnesses and speak the vow, then the right is yours." The girl's eyes locked on his, waiting, but James hesitated. He thought about everything. The night he found her in the cage, the ambush in the valley, the soldiers backing off because of her words. And now, this moment, here, in front of strangers who would decide her fate if he said no. The girl stepped closer, so close that her voice was almost a whisper. "This vow is not only words, it is protection. Without it, I will not live long." Her hand touched his briefly, a gesture that was part plea, part promise. James felt the tension in the hall tighten around him. He stepped forward to the table, the girl beside him. The leader began speaking in a slow, formal tone, the translator following every word. "Do you, human, take this vow to protect her, fight for her, and stand beside her until death?" He could feel the eyes of every rebel in the room, but his focus was on her. She stood straight, her chin lifted, waiting. "I do," he said, his voice steady. The leader turned to her. "Do you? Daughter of the royal line, accept this protector as bound to you under the first night?" Her golden eyes softened, and she answered without hesitation. "I do." The leader nodded, striking the table with a metal staff. "It is done." The rebels murmured among themselves. The leader leaned in slightly toward James. "Now you have made enemies you do not yet know. Protect her well." They were given food and a place to rest for the night. But James could feel the change. The rebels now treated them differently. Some with respect, others with suspicion. The girl stayed close to him, as if the vow had already begun shaping the space around them. Later, as they sat in the dim light of a small room, she spoke quietly. "You think this is the end of danger. But it is only the beginning. Now that you have claimed me, others will try to test you, to see if you are worthy." Her words were calm, but James could sense the warning beneath them. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks of the old building. And James knew she was right. This vow had changed everything. There was no going back, not for her, and not for him. The night in the rebel stronghold was short. The walls of the old building creaked in the wind, every sound making James half awake. By dawn, he was already on his feet, checking his rifle. The alien girl sat quietly in the corner, her eyes following his movements. She didn't speak until he slung the weapon over his shoulder. "They will test you today," she said, her voice calm. The translator gave the words an almost cold certainty. James frowned. "Test me how?" She rose to her feet, adjusting the simple cloak she had been given. "They must see if you can protect me, not only with your promise, but with your strength." As they stepped into the main hall, the rebel leader was waiting, her scarred face unreadable. A ring had been marked on the floor with white chalk. Inside it stood a tall alien male, wearing light armor and holding a staff tipped with metal hooks. "This is Karen," the leader announced. "He will challenge you. If you fail, your claim is broken, and she belongs to us." The girl's posture changed instantly. She moved closer to James, her voice urgent. "Do not let him touch me. If he does, the vow is seen as broken." James nodded once. Stepping into the circle, Karen grinned. Spinning the staff in his hands, the fight began fast. Karen lunged with surprising speed. James dodged, feeling the wind from the hooked end as it missed his face by inches. The rebels shouted from the edges of the circle, their voices echoing. Off the stone walls, Karen attacked again, driving James back. But James had fought in worse places, under worse odds. He waited for the right moment, then sidestepped a strike and caught the staff with one hand, yanking hard. Karen stumbled. James drove his fist into the alien's chest, sending him crashing to the floor before Karen could rise. James planted a boot on the staff, holding him down. The room went silent. Then the leader raised her hand. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying respect now. James stepped back, Karen slowly getting to his feet. His eyes narrowed, but without anger. "You fight well, human," he said through the translator, then left the circle without another word. The rebels murmured among themselves, some nodding in approval, others still watching with suspicion. The leader approached James. "You passed the first test," she said, then turned to the girl. "He may protect you for now." They were given food and water, but there was no time to rest. By afternoon, another call came. The leader led them to the edge of the stronghold, where the land dropped into a steep canyon. "If you claim the right of first night, you must be able to keep her alive beyond these walls," she said, pointing to the far side. "Cross this canyon by sunset, and you may stay. Fail, and you leave her here." The canyon was wide, the bridge that once crossed it long gone. Only broken rope and splintered wood dangled from the cliffs. The girl looked at James, her voice steady. "We can climb down, but the climb up will be harder." James studied the rock face. The wind was strong, and the sun was already starting. Its slow drop toward the horizon. They began the descent. The ropes frayed but still holding. James went first, testing each knot before letting her follow halfway down. A sharp crack echoed. A rock broke free above them. James swung toward her, pulling her close as the stone crashed past where she had just been. Her breath caught in her throat, her golden eyes wide, when they reached the bottom. The air was cooler, but the shadows were long. They moved quickly across the canyon floor, stepping over old bones and rusted metal. Something had died here long ago, maybe many things. The climb up the other side was worse. The rock crumbled under their hands. The ropes here were older, near the top. The wind picked up, threatening to throw them off balance. James climbed first, then reached down to pull her up. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't slow when they finally stood on solid ground. The sun was just touching the horizon, the stronghold visible in the distance. She turned to him, her voice soft. "You could have left me when the rock fell, but you didn't." James looked at her, sweat and dust streaking both their faces. "That's not how I work," he said simply. She smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen from her. They began walking back toward the stronghold, the sky now painted in deep gold and crimson. Somewhere behind them, the wind carried a distant howl. James didn't know if it was an animal or something worse, but he knew one thing: the tests weren't over. And the deeper he went into her world, the more dangerous it became. The stronghold's gates opened slowly when they returned, the rebels standing silent as James and the alien girl walked in. The sunset cast long shadows across the stone floor. The leader watched from the steps, her expression unreadable. "You crossed the canyon," she said simply, "but one challenge remains before your claim is beyond dispute." James felt the girl tense beside him. She asked in a low voice, "What now?" The leader stepped forward, her scarred face catching the last light of day. "A vow made in safety means little. You must protect her when death comes for her directly. Tonight, you will be hunted." The words hung in the air like a blade. James narrowed his eyes. "By who?" The leader's voice stayed calm. "Not who, what? An old beast that has roamed these hills for decades. Many have failed to kill it. If you survive the night, no one will question your right." There was no choice. The rebels gave James a spear and a torch. The girl tried to speak against it, but the leader silenced her with a look. "If he cannot keep you alive, then you are safer without him." They were led beyond the walls, into the hills where the wind carried a strange, heavy scent. The moon was rising, pale and cold. The ground crunched beneath their boots. James moved ahead, keeping her close behind. The night air was sharp. In his lungs, they found a narrow clearing between two jagged rocks and waited, the torch flickering in the wind. The girl's golden eyes never left the darkness beyond the rocks. "It hunts by sound," she whispered. "It will come when we are still." The first sign was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Then the sound of stone breaking. James gripped the spear tighter. The shadow emerged from between the rocks, huge and slow, its body covered in dark scales, eyes glowing faintly, its breath steaming in the cold air. The beast stepped into the light, its head low, nostrils flaring as it caught their scent. The girl stayed frozen. Just as she had said, James waited, timing its movements. Then when it lunged, he sidestepped, driving the spear toward its side. The tip scraped off the scales, not deep enough to wound. It swung its massive tail, catching James in the ribs. The air was knocked out of him. He staggered but didn't fall. The beast turned toward the girl, its jaws opening. James grabbed the torch and thrust it toward its face. The firelight made it recoil with a hiss. He pressed forward, shouting to keep its attention. Circling away from the girl, the beast charged again, faster this time. James used the torch to blind it, then drove the spear into the softer skin under its jaw. The creature roared, thrashing, but James held on until it finally pulled away, bleeding dark fluid onto the ground. The beast staggered back into the shadows, its growls fading into the hills. James dropped the spear, his chest heaving. The girl ran to him, her hands on his shoulders. "You faced it alone," she said, the translator's voice trembling. "You could have run, but you didn't." He managed a faint smile. I told you, I'm not leaving you." She looked at him for a long moment, then something in her expression softened completely. As if whatever wall she had kept between them finally broke, they made their way back. To the stronghold under the moonlight, the gates opened without a word. The rebels stood watching in silence. The leader stepped down from the steps, her eyes lingering on the torn edge of James's jacket where the beast's claws had grazed him. "You have proven your claim," she said at last. "From this night forward, she is yours to protect and yours to lose." The girl moved closer. To James, her voice low enough only he could hear. "Now they will not dare take me, because they know what you will do to keep me." James didn't answer, but inside he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the moment before the storm that would follow, because claiming her hadn't just made him her protector. It had made him a threat to those who wanted her gone, and threats never lived in peace for long. The days after the hunt were quieter, but James knew it was the kind of quiet that came before trouble. The rebels treated him differently now. Some nodded with respect when he passed. Others turned away, hiding their dislike. The alien girl stayed close to him always, her golden eyes scanning the stronghold like she was waiting for someone to strike. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, a messenger arrived at the gates, his armor marked with the royal crest. He demanded to see the girl. The leader met him in the main hall, James standing at her side. The messenger's gaze flicked to James briefly, then back to the leader. "The Royal Council has heard of this human's claim. They reject it." The words hit like a cold wind. The girl stiffened. "They have no right," she said through the translator. The messenger smirked. "They have every right, and they demand you be returned for judgment." James felt the air in the hall tighten, the rebels shifting uneasily. The leader turned to James, her voice low. "If you refuse, they will bring an army. If you go, they will kill her." It was the choice James had known would come. The claim had given her safety here, but beyond these walls, it was only a challenge to those who wanted power. That night, James and the girl sat in the small room they shared, the firelight flickering across her silver-blue skin. She spoke softly. "If you take me and run, they will chase us to the ends of the world. If you stay, they will come here and many will die." Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. James reached over, steadying them. "Then we don't stay, and we don't just run." She looked at him, confused. "We fight," he said simply. Her lips parted in surprise, but then a slow, fierce smile touched her face. At dawn, they left the stronghold with only what they could carry. The rebels watched from the walls, some wishing them luck, others glad to see them go. The leader handed James a small metal token before they left. "Show this to those who owe me favors. It might keep you alive," she said. The road ahead was open and dangerous, the plain stretching wide under a gray sky. They moved quickly, staying off main paths. By nightfall, they reached the edge of a forest, the air damp and heavy. Somewhere inside, an owl-like cry echoed. It was in that forest the first ambush came. Armored soldiers stepping from the trees, their weapons glinting in the moonlight. "By order of the council, surrender the girl," their leader said. James didn't waste time answering. He pushed her behind him and fired. The blast lit the trees. The soldiers fell back, but more moved in from the sides. The fight was fast and brutal, James striking hard, using the trees for cover. The girl stayed close, throwing sharp stones she picked from the ground. One hit a soldier's faceplate, sending him reeling. They broke through the line and ran, the forest swallowing them in darkness. When they finally stopped to breathe, the girl turned to him, her voice fierce. "You could have left me again and again, but you never did. I will not let them take you from me either." James didn't answer with words. He just nodded, and they kept moving. Days later, they stood on a cliff overlooking a distant valley. Beyond it lay free territory, no council, no law that could touch them. The girl took his hand, her fingers warm despite the cold wind. "When you saved me, you didn't know the law, you didn't know the vow, but you chose it anyway." Not for power, not for gain, but because you could not walk away. James looked at her, the weight of everything they had been through between them. "And I still won't," he said, the wind carrying his words out into the valley. They began the descent together, the road ahead uncertain. But for the first time, there was no hesitation in either of their steps, because whatever dangers waited beyond that valley, they would face them as one, bound not only by law, but by choice. And in a world built on fear and power, that choice was their greatest weapon.